All right, I think we
Hello,
are live.
yes, we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another live conversation here at Worldview Rain. My name is Adriano Bosoni. I am Director of Analysis at Worldview Rain. I'm joined today with my colleague Carmen Colosi. She's our leading Latin America analyst. And today we will be talking about something quite interesting, which is the results of the presidential election in Colombia. So, Carmen, Colombia has for decades been a rather conservative country where most of the governments were center right conservative. And suddenly, or maybe not suddenly, you will explain it, and they have elected a center left, or some would say left wing president. So, why? Why now? And what could happen next?
Yeah, so you're right on the money, Adriano, is that Colombia has been center right for a really long time. And that's because for many years, many decades of Colombian politics, it's really surrounded around the problem of what to do with cocaine trafficking in the country and what to do with, cartels, what to do with these armed groups that have come up. And so that has really been the main political focus. And through that, we've seen that many other issues have kind of fallen to the wayside. Now, in 2019 and 2021, we saw these large, widespread protest movements that they weren't necessarily focused on the issue of keeping with the peace agreement, for example. And so that these widespread protest movements were really a mechanism for the everyday Colombian to express their discontent with the current system and to say that they want to focus on these more local issues like global warming, issues like taxes, issues like lack of economic opportunity in domestic Colombia. And so that these social movements really served as political activation for many groups that for many years were not so politically motivated. And so because of that, we've seen the election of a president that was really kind of speaking to a lot of these domestic issues.
The irony is that while the Colombians did appoint a left-wing president, they also appointed a rather fragmented Congress, right? So Petro, which is the name of the new president, he will soon find that winning the election was actually the easy part, right?
Yes, very much so. We've seen that Congress is incredibly fragmented. There are some kind of movements within center leftist parties now, specifically the Liberal Party, to say that they are going to support the Petro presidency. But again, this is something that, as we've seen previously, parties in Colombia are easily swayed by current events and might not support his entire policy platform. Um, so that is definitely a constraint on the upcoming Petro
So
presidency.
do you expect like a total gridlock political paralysis, or do you think that he will be maybe skillful enough to negotiate, make some concessions? There will be like a constant negotiation in Congress, or do you think that he will stick to his campaign promises and he will not be willing to negotiate, or maybe give up on some of the campaign promises?
So, Adriano, I think that this will come really on a case by case basis. When it comes to things like passing taxes on the wealthy, that's something that we could almost certainly see center right and right leaning groups really kind of stick to their guns and say that they are not going to support that. When it comes to things like, rural economic reforms that are part of the 2016 peace deal, that's something that has a lot of popular support. That's something that many of these parties that might not have supported that previously could say that they would now support that kind of initiative under Petro.
By the 2016 peace deal, you mean the deal with the FARC, right?
Yes, the 2016 peace deal with the
Which
Revolutionary
is kind of
Army.
frozen, right? It was like a really big deal some 5-6 years ago, but nothing much has come out of that. Why is it paralyzed? And
Yeah.
why do you think Petro is the guy to actually unblock the process?
So it was paralyzed in essence because the peace deal initially stipulated that there would be a sort of a rapid mechanism to implement policy that was within the peace deal. It was really specific to, that process. A few years into the peace deal, they essentially said that they were not going to use that rapid process anymore, but that any legislation that had to do with kind of the issues to do with the peace deal were going to be, put through the legislature as if it was any other piece of legislation. And so that really created a lot of gridlock. And we've also seen that the current Duque administration, the administration of President Ivan Duque, has been really hesitant to support any sort of initiatives towards the peace deal, specifically because of this kind of very right-wing idea that if we are going to have guerrilla fighters, that they should essentially be held accountable for their actions while they were under these militancies.
That's super interesting. And Pedro has not shied away from making like grand statements. A few days ago, correct me if I'm wrong, did he say that he plans to reopen the border with Venezuela?
Yes. Yes, he posted on Twitter, essentially saying that he had been in contact with the Venezuelan authorities, that being the government of Nicolás Maduro. And essentially, he was saying that he was looking to find a way to reopen trade along the Colombian-Venezuelan border. What that means is that a border that's been shut since 2015 is going to be reactivated, and even if that's a small amount of goods that are going to cross the border, such as medicines or food items, that's something that is going to have a tangible impact for trade between the two countries. That's something that's going to force the two countries to kind of somewhat normalize diplomatic relations in an effort to create some norms around the border. You're going to have increased relations. And so this is something that's not only going to have an impact in domestic Colombia, but also have an impact in domestic Venezuelan politics as well.
I was going to say, this is good news for Venezuela, right? Because more trade and whatever else is happening in that border means more money for the Venezuelan administration, right?
Yes, even if it's a marginal amount, there will likely be some sort of trade increase in trade revenue. Again, very, very marginal numbers we're talking about because of, some US sanctions on Venezuela that are currently in place. So even if that does kind of go into effect, that's something that is essentially, we've seen a Colombian government that has been really supportive of the interim Venezuelan government of Juan Guaido, which is many countries around the world, including the US, recognize Juan Guaido over Nicolás Maduro, who many view as authoritarian.
You said something very interesting because you mentioned the US, which is the third piece of the puzzle, if you like.
Yes.
If you are the Biden administration, are you worried about a Colombian government that suddenly is friendlier to Venezuela? For years and years, the war on drugs was basically the United States' primary focus, not the only one, but it was a central part of US-Colombia relations. Will that change under Petro? Are the Americans worried?
So the Biden administration is definitely concerned about, evolution of politics in Colombia. That being said, Biden has been really kind of proactive in reaching out to the Petro administration. And we here at RAIN are really forecasting that at least under the Biden administration, relations between the two countries are likely to remain, at the very worst, strained, at the very best, cordial, and as they are currently. The two leaders, Petro, the president-elect, and Biden have already held a phone call where both came out of that call saying that there were positive developments.
That's super interesting. And from a more regional perspective, there's a lot of going on in South America right now. We have Chile electing a left-wing president. We
Yep.
have former left-wing president Lula in Brazil polling quite strongly, and he has a decent chance of winning the presidential election in Brazil in October. Now we have the Colombians electing a left-wing president. Is South America moving to the left?
So that's a very curious question, and one that experts have kind of debated. Is this a leftist movement? And we've seen, again, like you mentioned, many leftist presidents coming into power. But in many ways, this is a byproduct of this kind of anti-incumbent, anti-establishment vote that we've seen. And a great example of that is that in Ecuador, we saw them actually elect a right-wing president. But that's because the right-wing president was in contrast to this kind of large populist movement that had dominated the country for many years. So that's something that, it's more of an anti-incumbent environment, and a byproduct of that is that there are being, more and more leftist leaders being elected.
Which is interesting because in a way, Bolsonaro in Brazil was also like the anti-establishment
Yes.
and anti-system, and people are not that happy with him either, right? So the question is, I guess, what happens when you try the left, you don't like it, you try the right, you don't like it, you try the anti-establishment, and you don't like it. What's next? But yeah, that's what keeps South America quite interesting. Are there any other upcoming elections or any political developments that you are looking at to confirm whether or not populations continue to vote against the incumbents?
Yes. So obviously we have the Brazilian election coming up in October. That's something that, we do have the incumbent, as you mentioned, Bolsonaro, and we have not necessarily an anti-establishment candidate because Lula was a former president, but it will kind of show us if it's going to kind of shift to the left. That will really show us if this is kind of an anti-incumbent environment. Another great example is in Argentina. We're going to have elections in 2023. So that those elections, well, there's current polling out right now that is suggesting that actually the right-wing coalition is going to come back into power. Of course, many months until that happens. So we'll keep everyone posted on the RAIN website.
It's interesting, going back to Colombia, it's interesting that, at least for me, in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, for a very long time, Colombia, because of its domestic situation with the FARC and its very close ties with the United States and a succession of conservative governments, I would not go as far as to say that Colombia was isolated. That would be wrong, but it was not as willing as other South American countries to engage in regional cooperation forums, right? I remember 15, 20 years ago when the Kirchners were in power in Argentina, Lula was in power in Brazil, Correa was in power in Ecuador, Chavez was in power in Venezuela. There was significant coordination, cooperation, or at the very least, friendship or some degree of a political alignment between some of the largest economies in South America. And Colombia was kind of, I am exaggerating here a bit, but it was kind of doing its own thing. Are we about to see a Colombia that is more integrated in South American affairs?
That's a great observation. So in short, yes. As we are seeing, like you mentioned, all of these leftist governments coming into power, that's something that, there is somewhat of a new left in Latin America that is a little bit less ideologically driven, a little bit more driven towards wanting a greater state presence while also having, a capitalist economy. This is something that we could definitely see Petro really align himself with the governments of, say, Gabriel Boric in Chile, that is very, very similar, or potentially align himself with López Obrador in Mexico. So these kind of governments are, very likely to align themselves. Whether or not that will lead to a, greater integration has yet to be seen. There are still these, governments like Brazil and Argentina that are relatively closed off to trade ties. And so these kind of protectionist policies that still remain really present are what could really hinder a broader kind of regional integration. But we could see these kind of bilateral agreements, especially I would say between countries like Colombia and Chile.
That's super interesting. It's super interesting, and it's fascinating to see all these elections in South America producing similar results. There's a referendum coming in Chile as well that will also shape the political environment for years to come. There's a constitutional referendum. When is that happening?
That is happening September 4th. That is going to be a monumental moment for Chile. Essentially, Chileans will be deciding whether or not they're going to stay with their very business-friendly constitution or move to a more maximalist constitution, so to say, where there is just a plethora of new rights that are guaranteed. The rights for the business community are being scaled back in many ways. And so that will be really, emblematic of, this kind of new shift towards a greater state presence in Chile, but also in wider South America.
Really interesting stuff, and stuff that we at Rain Worldview cover all the time. Carmen is very busy producing content for us. So if you want to read Carmen's analysis, and of course, Rain Worldview covers the entire planet, you should look us out at rainworldview.com. We are right now offering a very special deal. It's like $1 for 4 weeks just to get a taste of the diversity of the content that we produce. So look for us online. Carmen, I'm afraid we are running out of time. It was great talking with you again. Thank you for sharing your knowledge on South America, which is a region that maybe doesn't get as much love as it should. So thank you for that. And enjoy the rest of the day. And thank you so much to everyone watching us live and in the recorded version that will be published soon. Thank you so much. See you guys soon.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.